Happy Father's Day to all of you who are fathers. Happy Father's Day to all of you who had fathers. For me, as a little girl after my father died, Father's Day was very conflicted. And the Lord's Prayer took on some kind of dual meaning. Our Father who art in heaven became my Father who is in heaven. Well, at least until I met Charlotte. And Charlotte told me that he couldn't be in heaven, because, not ever, because he was abominable. After a big, long, awkward pause, abominable? Yeah, like the snowman, my mom says. Because, of course, my father was gay. So I went home to my mom, and my mom said, "Oh, ever the practical Unitarian Universalist. Has Charlotte ever died? No. Has she ever been to heaven? No. Has she ever gone there and looked for him? No. Well, how would she know?" Oh, of course. Of course. So, in my childhood mind, things were put a little bit better. But the same problem was, heaven was way up high. And many adults that we know, maybe some people still in this room, we still think of heaven as up above. It seems we have an obsession with height. Humans of industry, since we have been humans walking around, we have been building towers, we've been making bricks out of mud, we've been challenging the elements. In any preschool classroom today, towers are being made out of blocks and they're being knocked down. On the side of the Family Assistance Center, 9/11, New York City, it was haunting to watch these young kids every single day build towers and smash them. Each act triggering staff and those of us who were there, even as they were part of the therapeutic needs of these children. We have a history of miscommunication as well. One thing means something deeply to one person, means something not at all, or something even the opposite to the other. From ivory towers to cell towers to pillars of democracy to pillars and posts we slide, in desperate need both of being right and being heard. And we sit there. So what do these ancient stories teach us about climbing and communicating? Versions of tower stories are universal. They're all over the world, from the Toltecs of Central America to African tribes around Lake, and I'm going to mess up this name, Ngami. I heard it, I listened to it, Ngami. One of the places where we know we've got the first stories of towers in mythology. Some arguably include Christian missionaries' influence into indigenous storytelling, but others appear to be really organic to the human condition. Some of people, they have a need to make all of these stories come from one common source. There was one great flood. There was one great tower. Just like we want to make all of our language come from one root source, all of it comes from the but not necessarily, because left to our own devices, science has now proved that we as a species are designed to create language. We're designed to communicate. But we humans, we're also tribal. We want to be around those who feel they're part of our tribe, and we don't necessarily want to be around those who we feel are not part of our tribe. We want to be around people that share the same words, the same beliefs, the same truth, the same ideals, the same culture, the same income. Thus we split this chasm between us and the other. Most of us are walking contradictions. Even in the story of the Bible, or, well, of course in the story of the Bible, there are really good sacred stories that have really good contradictions, because guess what? All sacred stories have contradictions. It's part of the job of the sacred story, to give us the space to dive deeply into our egos and our reason, and that space between our egos and our reason. So all sacred stories have to resonate on multiple levels, or we would never tell them again. We wouldn't remember them. They wouldn't be repeated. They wouldn't wound, and they wouldn't heal. In many ways, we go back to them because each time we can mine something that we need for today. And so the story of Babel has been really sitting with me a lot these recent days because we have so much miscommunication, lack of communication, refusal of communication going on in our world right now, and it is erupting into violence daily. In these dark times, Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, is held as historic truth by many, and it seems to be in direct contradiction with Genesis 10, Noah's descendants after the flood that supposedly took out everybody in the world once again, or the story of the idea of a clean slate. Genesis 10:5 states, quote, "From these coastland peoples spread the descendants of Japheth in their lands, in their own language, by their families, in their nations." And it goes on to the other three sons of Noah. So obviously in this story, what has been told is after this redo, you go spread out again, you learn your own languages, you find your own spaces, you cover the globe. Now, the story from Genesis 11, and I'm going to read this, because how many of you have last read the actual story of the Tower of Babel? Yeah. How many of you remember the story? Whoa, we got one. Two. My lay leader, yay. But for many of us, it's the story of an angry God who thought that humans were getting just a little too uppity by building a tower to reach him. That's often the short synopsis that you get. So I want to read the actual story, and I'm going to use the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. Now the whole world had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had the brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came to see the city and the tower which the mortals built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. Well, that sounds rather awful, doesn't it? Suddenly nothing was going to be impossible to us, and we were scattered? That does indeed sound cruel. What is this story about? Well, I want to just talk a little bit about some translation differences. King James, very, very suspect in terms of its translations, but they did hew to one word which I want to highlight, which is, "Now nothing will be restrained from them," instead of "impossible for them." In the Lamsa translation from the Peshitta, we have, "And they have reasoned to do this thing. Now nothing will prevent them from doing that which they have imagined to do." How could that be a bad thing? That sounds like it fits right in with that natural holy law. Saying so much of the law of attractions, all of these things that we hear so much about. How could that be a bad thing? If I can reason it, I can imagine it, I can do it. And then for the Green's literal translation, which is very wonky, by the way, And Jehovah said, behold, the people is one, the lip one to all of them. And this they are beginning to do. Just the lip, not the word. And now all which they have purposed to do will not be again restrained from them. So we have slightly different feelings. Words and language in sacred stories, they always have lots of interior meanings and lots of puns, as well as deeper lessons. And this story is absolutely no different. The Tower of Babel is the story of pride, the story of pride and ego, pride and communication, ego and communication. It is a story of hubris and humility. It is a story about our baser selves and our higher ones. And it's a story about following our tribal fears instead of our greater calling. And like I said before, we get stuck into that part of, but why can't I do what I want to do? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? And why should Daddy tell me I can't? And I kind of live there. But there's something else in this story. Because if we look at this, it's a little bit like a Zen koan. The word Babel literally means the gates of God. It also means to confuse and confound. So we see in Genesis 10, we were spread out all over. Well, maybe except for in this town of Babel, who thought they were the only ones going to build up the one tower of the one truth. So we come from a nation of speaking many languages, so who are we speaking about when we're talking about the citizens of Shinar? Us. We're talking about us. So why am I telling this story today? Because from an architectural and ancient perspective, the Tower of Babel was not to bring humans to gods. It was part of religious structures called ziqurats. Ziqurats? Z-I-Q-U-Q-R-A-T-S. Sacred staircases by which the gods descended to us. And then the meaning got lost. Just like the meaning of spires of churches. We forget that staircases go up and down. No matter what signs may be printed on them, go this way. Just like escalators can go up and down, just like elevators go up and down. And in the text, God, in the plural, still has to descend to us even after we have built this massive tower. So height is clearly irrelevant. But perhaps there's something more profound. The lesson for me is not that we build towers and structures for worship, but what we worship. What we worship there and how we define the divine, and how we keep missing the other stories that tell us to be broad and expansive. The building these towers that keeps God away. However you name the great mystery of love, outside of ourselves and away from us, from other nations, as long as you're putting that story up on a pinnacle, it keeps us separate and it can make us great, or have an idea that we were once great and want to become great again. We can be safe in our like-minded communities of individuals. And we forget that we have been called to be expansive and that we're all over the world. Perhaps the deepest and broadest lesson in the destruction of the tower is this. We have to spend time finding God, however you name the divine, in ourselves and each other. But how can I do that if I've only ever seen images of God as a white male with golden locks named Jesus? But how can I make that match for me? Imperial Christianity has taken a hold of the message, and once again we are lost. We're cast out from any towers even as we struggle to create them. We strive to see God as a woman. We strive to see God as gay. And I think it's actually a needed artifice to be able to see God as yourself. But I think that we have to extend this in a deeper way, because we're all made in the image of God. And once again, we are sent to that place that place where there's that dichotomy. How can we all be made in the image of God if God is one? I mean, if we're all made in the image of God, that's a really scary idea. And so we go back into the idea of myth, like-minded people, because we don't want to think that the evil in this world is being done by people who are also made in the image of God. That's really a hard idea to hold, to be able to be with that which we have othered. We need our tribe. We need to belong. And so part of what we do is we try and make everybody like us. Or we try and make everybody like us. I do both. Sitting in that space is really difficult. But this is what it is. We are all mirrors for each other. And we are all, each, totally unique. On a very deep level, looking at each other as anything other than unique, special, and holy devalues what is essential, holy, and universal. We are mirrors for each other, but we have to see the divine in each other. An early Sumerian story of the building and destruction of a tower is actually the story of two gods. Enki, the god of wisdom, and Enlil, the god of power, sometimes also called the god of storms or wind. It's not a story of man versus God. It's a story of God versus God. It's a story of wisdom versus power. Now, when you know this, and you know this is the genesis of the story in Genesis, I want you to hear how it might shift how you hear that story. In that version, Enki, the god of wisdom, wins, scattering the peoples and their languages. The god of wisdom wins over the god of power by scattering their languages and scattering the people. For me, it's an early teaching of Reverend William Gladstone's teaching, which was echoed by Sri Chinmoy and Jimi Hendrix and bumper stickers all over cars when I was a youth. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. And for me, that is the story of the tower. The story of the tower tells us that we are called not to be with like-minded individuals who only speak the same idea, echoing it back and forth. The lip, not language, the lip. But to be present. It seems we are called to embrace our diversity, to be broad and wide, not to be towers or pillars, but to be trees whose roots stretch out and touch each other and in fact communicate with each other, whose fruit is different, feeding ourselves and each other as we reach down, as we reach up, as we reach out. Natalie Briscoe from the Congregational Life Field Staff for the UUA in the Southern District recently wrote, whoa. It's a wonderful blog. Please go check it out. And she wrote this about the current state of the UUA, but there are pieces of it that really I feel apply to this right now. She writes, our love of the story that informs who we are, transfers to a love of these structures that we've built. But she goes on to say, the things we must build with such care and time must be deconstructed. Where once they were vehicles to bring the story to life, they are now the things which we stand in the way of our journey. We must take them apart in order to remember what it was about them that was so important to begin with. This part of the story, this stage of faith, is scary and often painful. It's hard to let go. It's hard to see stories torn down. And yet if we don't do this, we're stuck. Our stories and the values they represent are held captive by the structures, and we become unable to move forward on our journey to a deeper faith. Tearing down the structure only destroys the mission if the mission wasn't clear to begin with. If the work is clear and we understand ourselves to be the builders of the beloved community, then this process won't destroy us. It will set us free. The Koran in Surah 30:23 says, quote, "Among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the diversity of your tongues and colors. And that in that surely are signs for those who possess knowledge." So if we take this story back to its bones and the steps it takes to bring the divine to earth and ourselves to the divine, it might simply mean, as I say over and over again, we need to see God in each other, all over the earth, in everyone. To stop listening with interpretations of our stories. Not letting someone else tell you what the story is supposed to be. But like God, simply be present. And then we can start hearing with our hearts. And hearing with our hearts, we can act with love, and we can act accordingly. So rather than deny or say we have, we say we are, and we are here, and we welcome you. That's it. Amen. Namaste. And so